Today, we're going to talk about everything you need to know about serial killers and some things that you wish that you did not know. Well, all of this and more right here on today's Charlie Show. What some people are calling, well, the fastest minutes in podcasting. Well, hello and welcome again to our podcast. We welcome you from the East Coast to the West Coast. It does amaze me to this day how many people we have listening. And please let me welcome you if you're a first-time listener, a new listener. In fact, give us a shout out. You can reach us at charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That is charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you, and we do thank each and every one of you on some of the comments that we got from the Russian invasion of the U.S. That episode was published last week. Get caught up if you haven't yet heard that one. In fact, we're taking up one recommendation. We're going to be adding pretty soon a new Charlie show entitled Let's Talk About It. We're going to give guests an opportunity to be a part of the show. We're going to do it on a certain weeknight, and we're planning to do it live. Yep, brand new live. And we're going to give you an opportunity to fold in, be a part of the podcast. We'll have some guests, and they're going to be able to talk about our past podcast episodes and even other subjects. Now, you can follow us on Facebook to keep up with those episodes. Just search Charlie Crimebuster on Facebook, and you're going to find us. We'll actually give you a link in our Facebook page, in our show notes today. Also, for any new listener, well, we're going to send you out a welcome gift for you joining with us today, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. If it's your first time writing to us or emailing us, then you're going to get a special welcome gift. I guarantee you'll like it. So reach out to us, give us a shout, tell us any suggestions you may have, or just say, hey, dude, hi, and we're going to let you know we appreciate you. You can reach me again, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Hey, and while you're at it, please take time. Check out our new project called peacemakernetwork.com. Here, you can become a part of a network of support. That's right, a network of support for the brave men and women of law enforcement, the first responders who rush to help us, and the brave men and women of military. That's right, you can help all of those good heroes. Go to peacemakernetwork.com. Check it out. We are going to, again, provide a link in our show notes. Well, now today's topic is serial killers among us. And while experts tell you that, well, statistics say it's really unlikely that you'll ever face a serial killer. But unfortunately, most of the time, if you ever do, you never see it coming. You see, you're stalked. These predators will sometimes come, well, when you least expect it. Or simply you might find yourself in the wrong place at the right time for a serial killer to strike. You see, there's a recent example. You see, and it's this example I want to share with you. It's still a little debatable whether it's a serial killer killing or not. And we're going to let you know how to distinguish what a serial killer does compared to other killings in a moment. But it happened right here in our area. You see, just recently we completed what is called the famous Bike Week in Daytona, where thousands upon thousands of motorcycles descend upon our fine, beautiful city. And this one was one of our larger ones because people were ready to come out from the pandemic. Well, there was a beautiful couple who lived right here in our community, worked in our community. They had been out to the activities, and they were actually coming back to their home on bicycles, not motorcycles, but bicycles. They were on their way home from the activities when, get this, they were attacked by a stranger. Yep, attacked and killed while riding their bicycles home. Their throats were slit, husband and wife, killed by what seemed to be a random attack. Was this a serial killer? Well, time will tell. But how do you protect yourself from such a random killing? Well, one way is to better understand how a serial killer operates. You see, experts tell us that a serial killer is typically a person who murders 3 or more people. Usually, they have a motive of some abnormal psychological gratification when the murders are taking place. And those murders do take place, now get this, with a significant period of time between them. Some experts call that the cooling down time, and then they get revved up again and they have to go out and kill again. Now the profile, additionally, can show that number may be 3 or more, and there are some who would lessen it to 2 and some who would extend it to 6. That is, in the number of victims. But let me point out, serial killers are not mass shooters, and mass shooters are not serial killers, even though their body count may include even more victims. You see, mass shooters often kill in one spot. An example is a Las Vegas mass shooter, or a school shooter, or a mall shooter. And experts do tell us that with serial killers, it is the psychological gratification that is usually the motive. That may also include sexual contact with the victim. Now, additional motives for a serial killer would be anger, thrill-seeking, financial gain, and even attention-getting. And the victims they have, well, they have something in common, usually, may have. It may be demographic, maybe their appearance. They may look like a certain appearance. It may be their gender. It may even be their race. So in order to catch these serial killers, well, the FBI, they look for patterns. Those patterns will give them a profile. Now, it is also important to really emphasize that when you talk about what a serial killer looks like, or the profile, we must emphasize that one size does not fit all. There are always exceptions to these patterns. Now, in order to understand the operation of a serial killer, I'm going to share with you some facts that you may or may not know about serial killers. We're also going to talk about some shocking things about them. And I'm going to even tell you about an active serial killer that's active right now here in the USA. May even tell you about more than one of them. But first, we always take time on our podcast to share with you about people who stand out from the crowd. We call those people our Courageous Citizen of the Week. And today, we have 2 of them. They're 2 teenage boys, that's right, 2 teenage boys, and they're being hailed as heroes. That was after they stopped, now get this, an alleged kidnapping of a 25-year-old woman from their own car. You see, the Texas teenagers, they're from Texas, Aaron Harris and Jamal Harris. They are really, my friend, downright heroes. You see, you never know who you might notice in the car next to you when you're just cruising along or you're waiting at a stoplight. Well, for sure, it's not exactly the best place to take the time to get to know someone. So oftentimes, you and I will take a quick glance and then we'll go about our busy days. But sometimes, just noticing the smallest of details, well, it can make a world of difference in someone's life. This happened back in August. A couple of years ago, 19-year-old Aaron Harris and his 17-year-old friend at that time, Jamal Harris, they were driving in downtown Dallas. They were going to pick up a friend from work. And then they noticed, now get this, an attractive girl in the back seat of the car next to them. Now, of course, not being in the driver's seat, well, Jamal's, his gaze, well, he lingered a little longer than Aaron's. But then he realized something. He realized that the girl was mouthing, "Help me, help me." He could make that out from her lips and reading her lips. Well, at first, now Harris, he was driving. He thought his friend was joking. But then they saw the driver's face, and the driver looked back, and they realized it was for real. So they got real focused, and they did what anybody should do. They called 911. Here's the way that 911 call went. "Yes, I'm on the highway. I'm witnessing a robbery." "No, not a robbery, a kidnapping." That's what Harris explained on the call. That call was later released, and it was picked up by several news outlets. "It's me and another guy. So we're checking out the girl in the back seat because, well, we're like, okay, she's kind of attractive. But then all of a sudden, the guy looks back, turns back, looks at us." Now, according to NBC, DWF, well, Harris and Harris, they followed the guy, now get this, for nearly an hour. They stayed on the phone with the responders. Eventually, the driver, he realized he was being followed. He started acting and driving erratically. He sped up. He slowed down. He tried to lose the guys, but thankfully, finally, the police arrived. And after a chase, the authorities, they arrested a man by the name of Charles Atkins Lewis. He was charged of aggravated kidnapping. He was held on a $50,000 bail. And according to the Dallas Morning News, that unidentified 25-year-old woman, she had been at a young professionals party downtown. It was about 11 p.m. when she was walking to her car, and she was struck on the head 3 times. What she believed was a handgun. The man then forced her into the back seat of the car. Police, they did later find a handgun and a knife. And in an affidavit, the woman, she told investigators she was fearful of her life and of a sexual assault. So I guess it's no surprise that when she was rescued from the car, you got it, she ran straight toward these 2 teens who had ensured her safety. She gave them a giant hug. Harris, you know what he said? He said, I would describe it as the best hug I've ever gotten. That's what Harris told NBC. He also added that he'd like to stay in contact with the woman, but of course he did not want to interfere with the investigation. So my friend, these two teens who were aware enough to notice that a young lady was in trouble and had the courage enough to call the police. My friend, these 2 teens are indeed what we call Charlie's Courageous Citizens of the Week. Now we want to share with you some facts that you just may not know about serial killers. You may or may not know these facts. First, the very first modern serial killer is a guy by the name of Jack the Ripper. That's what he was called. And get this, you may not know this. He's still unidentified to this very day. Yep. Happened back in 1890 in London. He killed at least 5 women and possibly more. And there's some very interesting things now that came out of that investigation. For instance, there was forensic material gathered at the scene, just like you see on CSI, only it was way back in 1890 when that first happened. And there were suspects that were identified, and many of those suspects were what we call tracked. Today we call it time-tracked, or setting a timeline, which is an investigative tool used to this very day. And you know what else that's unusual and interesting about that case? There was even a police surgeon by the name of Thomas Bond. And he even assembled, now get this, a character profile of the offender. I guess this is where that profiling of these suspects actually originated. Wasn't the FBI profile unit that we hear about today, but all the way back to the 1800s, and the case of Jack the Ripper. And something else really interesting. You see, this appears to be the first time that there was a worldwide media frenzy about the case. You see, people heard about it, and they were talking about it all over the world. And the media attention, it brought about an awareness of London's urban poor. And you know, today the media does continue to play a part in catching serial killers, in fact, to this very day. You see, while it may be too early to tell of the man who randomly killed the couple returning to their home from this year's Daytona Bike Week, I call him the Daytona Slasher, but we do know that the media involvement actually led to his capture. You see, he allegedly slit the throats of the victims. But he was caught because, now get this, photos were released of a person of interest that was, get this, caught on camera in the area. You see, these photos, they were released to the media. The media got them out there. And then tips came in. Even from a restaurant where he had been identified and left a credit card. They tracked him down nearly 100 miles away, there in Orlando from Daytona, and that led to his arrest. So, media, first involvement, that started, get this, way back there at the first modern-day serial killer, the guy called Jack the Ripper, who is unidentified to this very day. Now, just a footnote, while the first modern-day serial killer got attention, that was from London. Well, the mass majority, though, of documented serial killers in the 20th century, the mass majority, unfortunately, are from the United States. Now, secondly, serial killing, well, it was especially prominent. Now, get this, prominent from 1970 to 2000. That time had actually been described by some as, quote, the golden age of serial killers. That's 1970 to 2000. That period actually peaked around 1989, and then it's been going steadily trending downward ever since. Now, there is a professor at Radford University, and he stated some reasons as why we start to see a downward trend during that time. He said because, number one, there was less frequent use of parole. We didn't parole as many people. Secondly, there was improved forensic technology. Can you say DNA? Sure. And then, because of that, people were behaving a little more cautiously. But I'd like to add to that, to the professor's list, that media in the social media. You see, today we have an entire army of armchair crime investigators in social media. Many of these have actually been effective. Now get this, in putting the spotlight on such criminals and crime. Brought them to the forefront, and then they were solved. I'd like to also add the use of cameras, which such use I alluded to just a few moments ago in the Daytona Slasher case. Now, next, you may not know, but there is a psychopathic behavior that's consistent with the traits and very common to most serial killers. This includes, but is not limited to, sensation seeking. You know, some of them love media attention. They even send public messages for that attention. And, of course, there is there is a great lack of remorse. They simply do not feel guilt. They are impulsive, and they have a need to control. And by the way, that need of control is also true of the rapists. Then there is yet another trait, which I really think makes him quite dangerous to our safety. It is what a psychiatrist by the name of Hervey Checkley, he called it, quote, unquote, the mask of sanity. You see, this is where they seem normal to most people around them, and often quite charming indeed. Can anyone say Ted Bundy? He was that type. And there are other common characteristics of some serial killers. They are often abused emotionally, physically, or sexually by a family member. You see, my own time of investigations as a special victims investigation experience, well, that experience can tell you that most children molested, they have been molested, now get this, by family members, not strangers. And while stranger danger does exist, and you should warn your children about that, also, my friend, watch out for relatives and people within your own family that abuse children. Now, serial killers can also start out in petty crimes, fraud, theft, property being vandalized. A high number of them will even exhibit what we who study criminology refer to as the McDonald triad. Now, that McDonald triad, some people call it the triad of homicidal triad. It's basically a set of three factors. And the presence of any two of those are considered to be predictive or associative of violent tendencies. And they can become serial offenses. You see, this was first proposed by a psychiatrist. His name, I guess you already guessed that. Yep, it was McDonald, actually J.M. McDonald. And in 1963, he wrote an article entitled The Threat to Kill. That article was posted in the American Journal of Psychiatry. Now, there are three, and here they are. Number one, cruelty to animals. Number two, obsession with fire setting. And number three, persistent bedwetting past a certain age. In fact, more than 60% wet their beds beyond the age of 12. And some of these serial killers, they were bullied or socially isolated as children. In fact, that serial killer by the name of Henry Lee Lucas, well, he was ridiculed as a child. He even later talked about being rejected by those around him, and he said that caused him to have a hatred of everyone. Often, some of these guys have trouble keeping their jobs. And one thing else I'd like to mention to you, and this one you may not know. You see, serial killers really generally have an average or low IQ. You see, although the movies and the media, well, they often prescribe them as possessing very high IQs above average. But the real range, well, let's put it this way, a sample of 202 of these IQs, they had a median range of 89 as their IQ score. But again, let me remind you, one size does not fit all. You see, Harold Shipman, he was a doctor, considered a pillar of the community. He even won professional awards for work in a children's asthma clinic. In fact, the FBI tells us serial killers, well, they often seem normal, have families, have a steady job. Perhaps those folks are the most dangerous. Now, those are some of the characteristics and behaviors of serial killers. In a moment, I want to tell you a couple of the shocking things I found about serial killers. Plus, I want to tell you about one serial killer that's active right now in the U.S. But right now it's time to lighten it up a little bit with what we call our Crazy Crook Story of the Week. And boy, this is a doozy. Our featured Crazy Crook story this week is a guy by the name of Ruben Zarate. And he is going to be right up there at the top of the list of Charlie's Crazy Crooks. This robber, you see, he was an 18-year-old. His name was Ruben Zarate. He decided to rob a muffler shop there in Chicago, and he showed up there demanding money, and he showed a gun to the staff. Well, the staff, they were threatened, but you see, there was a problem. You see, they could not give more money to the robber because the manager was not there, and the money was in a safe lock, and only the manager could open it. Surely the robber would understand. And my friend, he did understand. He had a plan. Yes, he had a crazy plan. You see, this brilliant robber, well, he left his phone number. And he asked them that when the manager comes back, please give him a call. Oh, sure they will. And I bet you already know what happens, right? Well, those workers, you see, they actually called the police instead of him at first. And then they told the entire story of what happened. And the robber, well, as he was giving himself kiddos for being such a smart and finding such a wise way to get his money, well, the police, they asked the staff to call the robber that the manager had come back in the shop. And now you can come back and threaten him for the money. Well, I guess the robber thought surely he would be put into the Robbers' Hall of Fame as he showed up at the store, only to find the Popo waiting for him. He tried to run, shoot his way out of this crazy mistake, but the Popo prevailed, and he was arrested. So if you find out you can't get the money, well, maybe not a good idea to trust the people you just tried to rob to get the money you did not deserve in the first place. And that, my friend, is our Crazy Crook story of the day. Now let me share with you some shocking things we found out about some of these serial killers. Now, remember we first mentioned Jack the Ripper, that he was the first modern-day serial killer, and we introduced that many of the investigation techniques are still being used to this day. Well, I bet you did not know that Jack the Ripper had studied, now get this, and perfected such a way to slit his victim's throat so that the blood would not drip or spew onto his clothes. You see, this was a person who thought more about how to kill his victims than he did about the victims that he killed. And then another shocking thing, a guy by the name of Pee Wee Gaskins. He is a serial killer from South Carolina. He actually drove around in a hearse with a bumper sticker that said, "I haul dead people." He told people that he needed it to take the bodies of people that he had killed to his, quote, private cemetery. My friend, he would definitely be an Uber driver you would not want to call. And my final shocking fact that I would share with you about serial killers today, Mac Ray Edwards. He was a serial killer who worked for Caltrans. He'd kill his victims, then bury the bodies in places that he would later now help build highways over. You see, not all his victims have even been found. Many are likely still under some of the California highways that people drive over countless times. Think about that the next time you're driving over highways in California. Now I want to tell you about some serial killers that are among us right now. And while I might find myself, as many of you, fascinated about the hunt for these dangerous and violent people, my friend, I never admire them. They are cruel and pathetic people who do not deserve any admiration whatsoever, these serial killers. However, I do admire the men and women of law enforcement who put on badges, risk their lives every day to keep us safe. I do admire the first responders who rush into harm's way to render us aid. And I so admire the bravest men and women of the world who put their whole lives on hold, fly off to a distant land to fight for our freedom, the military. In fact, our young heroes that I mentioned as Charlie's Courageous Citizens of the Week, well, they feel the same way. You see the young man who helped save the kidnapped girl? Well, he said this about the police. While he was on the phone with the police, he said, "Thank God, you guys are awesome." That's what Eris said in the recording. You see, this is why we have formed the nonprofit Peacemaker Network, as a way to show support to these brave men and women. And for as little as $3 a month, just $3 a month, you too can show support. Go to peacemakernetwork.com. See the things we're already doing for these heroes. Be a part of our network of support today. Now, we have not asked for any financial help on this podcast at this point, but we do ask you to help us help others. Together, we can make a difference. Please go to peacemakernetwork.com today. There'll be a link in our show notes. Now, what about serial killers that are walking among us today? Well, again, the FBI and authorities tell us there's between 25 and 50 walking among us every day. I'm going to tell you about one of them right now. They are dubbed, or he is dubbed, or she is dubbed, the Long Island Serial Killer, or the Craigslist Ripper. The extent of these unsolved crimes is still unknown. You see, it was only after authorities accidentally stumbled upon human remains while searching for a missing sex worker. Her name was Shannon Gilbert. They suddenly realized that Gilgo Beach, well, it might be a dumping area for a serial killer. After initially uncovering 4 bodies, well, the police widened their search. They discovered another, get this, 6. 8 of them were women, all escorts who used Craigslist to advertise their services. One body was that of a toddler, later to be discovered to be the daughter of one of the victims. Another body was that of a cross-dressing male, adding a further mystery to this killer's motives. You see, several suspects were soon identified, but none of them with any conclusive ties to the 10 victims found. There actually is a theory that the killer possibly has law enforcement background, judging by how he's managed to elude capture for so long. So, my friend, the mystery of the Long Island serial killer, it lives on. And between 2005 and 2009, the bodies of 8 women between the ages of 17 and 30, they were found dumped in the swamps also of Jefferson Davis Parish near Jennings, Louisiana. This is another one. We're going to tell you about that one next week. Well, my friend, there's some lessons. First, while these human monsters are among us, please keep in mind that you're really more likely to be struck by lightning, particularly if you live here in Florida where I live, than to be killed by a serial killer. In fact, something like 1% of killers are actual serial killers. So don't lock yourself in your house and board it up like Fort Knox. But when you do go out, practice what we always tell you is situational awareness. Don't stay glued to your cell phone to the point that you're not paying attention to your awareness and of what is going on around you. Next, don't text and drive. I guarantee you, if you do that, you're far more likely to die that way than by a serial killer. Even more, unfortunately, you're more likely to kill some innocent people. Next, avoid unnecessary confrontation. We published a podcast a few weeks ago called The Popcorn Murder Case, where a young man, a husband, a father, a son, lost his life in the prime of his life. And over what? Using a cell phone in a theater and over popcorn, all which came about because of an unnecessary confrontation between two people. When confronted, walk away. Do not engage. This can be some of the best advice you'll get on this program in today's society. By the way, that includes road rage that you exhibit. So what? You get cut off in traffic. Someone's not driving up to your standards, really? Is it worth your life and the life of others? It is not, I can assure you. And while it is good to know how serial killers operate, it is just as important for you to keep you yourself and your loved ones safe. So until this time next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster saying, be safe, be alert. For the life you save, it may be your very own.